off talking with David Witt, who is a lead user experience and HMI designer at Karma Automotive, and Andrew Tai, who's a CEO at Motoinsight. And they're going to introduce themselves in a little bit more detail in a minute. But I wanted to start off with getting from each of them an answer to a quick question, which is, how do you define innovation personally and for your organizations? And what is the end goal of innovation for your companies? And if you could start off by just letting us know exactly what it is that you do for each of your organizations and then answer the question, that would be great. So Andrew, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks everyone for attending today. My name is Andrew Tai. I'm the CEO at Motoinsight. We help traditional automakers and dealerships deliver Tesla rivaling Amazon-like car buying experiences with our retail technology. Innovation for us, I think, is about constantly wanting to do better, continuous improvement, and wanting to disrupt yourself before someone else disrupts you. And for us, we think the end output for that really is delivering continuously better customer experiences.
So, hello everyone. Very pleased to be here today. So I'm David Witt, a lead user experience and human machine interface designer at Karma Automotive. I've been in automotive design as a background since roughly 2011. Worked on the original Ford Sync 2, and I was attracted to this vertical because of the sucky user experience on most infotainment screens at the time. And I got inside and realized that making the sausage isn't easy, but it's certainly rewarding. And we're in a period that more choices than ever, more technologies than ever. So it's just tremendously exciting. So to answer the question, I guess I want to have a two-part answer. Generally, I like Stuart Butterfield, the founder and CEO of Slack. He defined innovation. He said, I think the only measure of innovation is how much it changes people's behaviors. And that's really, that's what it all comes down to, is why can we make a meaningful impact and change, not just one time, but create meaningful, lasting change. So personally, as a user experience designer, I'm swimming in innovation every day. It's the water that I swim in. I'm amphibious, so when I come out, it's the air that I breathe. So innovation is a given as far as I'm concerned, but from a user experience standpoint, I'm really focused on trying to create something, an experience that really elevates the functional aspect of what people are trying to do. There's a famous industrial designer named Tucker Viemeister who coined this wonderful term called butility. So at its core, a product has to have utility for us, but I think we've all had experience with products that just work and they're okay, but they don't really do much for you at the end of the day. Or you may even feel bad when you use them, but at least you're able to get something done and you're like, oh, boy, thank God I got that over with. But so for me, the task of user experience and really elevating innovation into a prime user experience is to create that moment where it's an experience that's not just functional, but it's pleasurable and it leaves you with a lasting positive impact about the product and the brand that you're using.
Great, and I can tell you that he definitely does live and breathe this stuff from the conversations that we've had. So let's talk a little bit about, how you actually get your companies to really live and breathe that innovation, because I think with this industry, we see that, it is an industry that's often very challenged by industry regulation, by competing consumer preferences and that sort of things, which sometimes seems to be more restrictive than facilitative. So how do you foster a culture of innovation in your various organizations and in light of these sort of competing pressures on the companies?
So it's very carefully, I think, is the operative word. Automotive is a very traditional industry, heavily capitalized. There's a lot of money involved in producing an automobile. So the management tends to be very conservative about product pipeline and what actually makes it into the car. So there's always there's an uphill battle there. I think they've seen the light, things are changing, but we're at a point where, innovation and change are recognized as important, but how that happens is what we're all working through, basically. I'm fortunate that within the design studio, our global VP of design is very focused on innovation, very focused on user experience. We're a luxury brand, so we have a higher bar set for us in terms of what our products do for our customers and how they appear to our customers. And so he makes it easy internally to innovate, and the fact that I'm given free range basically to, I have my job, which is designing these things, but the other, X amount of my time is spent, beating the bushes, finding, new technologies, new ways of interacting, looking at societal trends, and just being tasked to put that all together. And then when I cook up something, I bring it to the chain, and then, we work through the process, and there's a lot of arm wrestling that happens, but, you win some and lose some, I would say.
For us, we've got the unique perspective of working with the traditional automakers that have been around for decades and decades, and the dealerships that have been with decades and decades. And I think one of the ways we're able to see things through a different lens is, for us as a company, the vast majority of our team actually have never worked in the auto industry before. And so we really view things from the consumer lens. I myself started this company as a consumer, not as a auto dealer or having had a steep set of experience in automotive at all. And I think that allows us to bring a different perspective. But over the years, the last 7-8 years that we've been doing this, we've been able to understand the needs of the automaker, the needs of the dealer, as well as the needs of the consumer, and help bring a sense of balance and perspective across all three.
What does that look like, usually, in terms of bringing that balance together? How does it look like, generally speaking? Where have you seen it sort of work? Are there some autos that you think are more receptive to that, responsive to that, or help you meet your consumers' needs?
Yeah, I think certainly there are some brands that are more aggressive, and some brands that are more conservative. But at the end of the day, I think we are all consumers, and what we try to help our automaker and dealer partners see is take a step back and think about the best consumer experiences that you've experienced across the industries. Whether that be how beautiful the Starbucks app is when you go in to Starbucks and you're able to order your coffee without having to stand in line, through to groceries, or even eyeglasses, right? You think about Warby Parker and how they've transformed that segment. Really, there's no industry that I can think of where the retail experience hasn't been transformed. And when we take a step back and don't think about just automotive and think about what are the best in class experiences across all segments, that's really where I think whether you're a dealer or an automaker or an innovation partner like ourselves, you're able to kind of see beyond just the automotive space.
So to continue that line of thinking, then, what are some of the top emerging technologies that you are seeing in product innovation in the industry, and how do you see that they're being embraced by your customers?
So there are a number of them. More, I think right now 4G connectivity to the car, 4G, 5G, over-the-air updates, a lot of different interface modalities coming into the car. Touch screens were just the beginning, and they're far from the end point. And additional infotainment technologies, and really the content that the pipe is bringing into the car. So in terms of our consumer, like that's always a tricky one to mediate, but I obviously look at a lot of, do a lot of user testing, do a lot of market research. I'm constantly looking for different perspectives on what people want and need. But at the end of the day, I have to say that I side with the Steve Jobs School of Design when, famously the iPhone didn't do any user testing on that. They did it after they designed it, but they didn't do it before they designed it. So I don't say you don't discount what the consumer wants, but you can't really build a successful product by just listening to what people say they want. So there's sort of this X factor that has to come in. You have to push a little bit. You have to, that's a fine process, but you really can't stand on the status quo, and you have to be bold and take your shots where you can to create a memorable product that differentiates itself in the market.
Yeah,
But just to continue, but how do you do that when you have such competing tastes? And I'll give an example. So for example, when I travel, if I go to New York, typically if I call an Uber, I'm going to get some kind of sleek looking black car or something. And the other day I was traveling in Texas and I got picked up in a Ford F-150, which was very new for me. but so I'm just curious because there's like some real divergent, sort of experience that people are looking for.
Well,
And product interfaces that they expect. So I'm just curious how you meet those different demands.
Well, so again, that's different for every brand. Personally, for our brand, we look for a very strong point of view. Our head of design demands a strong point of view. And if you've ever seen the inside of a Karma and seen the infotainment screen or the digital cluster screen, you'll see it looks nothing like anything in any other car. It's clearly not to everyone's taste, but it serves its purpose for brand distinction, and it's better to stand strong in one area than to spread yourself too thin, because an old truism in design is if you're designing for everyone, you're designing for no one.
What are your thoughts on that, Andrew, in terms of the top emerging technologies that you're seeing from the consumers that are interacting with the dealers you work with?
Yeah, no, it's interesting hearing David kind of talk about the products themselves. For us, we spend a lot more of our time on the purchase and ownership journey, if you will. And some of the big things that we're seeing, quite frankly, mirror what we've seen in other industries. So I'll use an analogy here. When we think about how music has transformed over the last few decades, right? In the 90s, you'd walk into HMV and you'd buy an album, like a CD, right? In the 2000s, that transaction went digital. You'd go onto iTunes, you'd still buy an album, you'd download it, save it onto your iPod, and you moved on. And then today, when you think about music, it's the nature of the transaction has entirely transformed, right? We don't buy albums anymore. You just buy music, Tidal, Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play, what have you. You pay a price monthly, and it's kind of all you can eat. You just get the utility. You just buy music. And we actually think there's a similar transition going on in automotive. And when you look at other industries, a lot of this has kind of played out over and over again. But in automotive, today and certainly yesterday, you'd go into the dealership and go through that traditional rigmarole, that negotiation, that transaction that most customers don't relish. Tomorrow, we're going to see that transaction moved digitally, right? And that's where once considered fringe actors or pioneers like Tesla have changed the retail model, right? And so we're seeing the car purchase journey moved online and moved digitally. But then the jump beyond that, and we're already starting to see this, is the nature of the transaction change entirely, where subscription ownership or subscription purchasing for automotive is already coming. And you've seen a lot of luxury automakers, from BMW to Porsche to Mercedes and others come to the market and experiment with those models. Still very, very early days, but we think that there's a lot of potential there.
So I want to ride on to this because actually it's not a challenge because I agree with what you're saying. But who buys albums anymore? I actually buy albums. And there's actually vinyl is resurgent these days. The album experience, I think what I want to get to is that there are large market trends, but they're by no means a mono trend. So. Right. And actually that means, okay, if it's digital downloads, are you going to compete with Apple and Amazon? No, you're not. But can you compete in a niche market that offers a counter, a different experience? So there's room for all sorts of models. But the other thing that I am struck with too, and I see a future in, is the digital, physical, human hybrid experience. So it's great to do everything online if that's the way you personally want to do it, but if a customer requires a human touch point or a product touch point, to be able to integrate that in with the digital experience and create a more deeper experience for those that require that. Those are some of the things we're looking at, and it sounds like it's applicable in your space as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think one quote comes to mind. Warby Parker is a good example of a company that was born in the digital age, but very much is moving into the physical retail now. So the eyeglass manufacturer, and Neil Blumenthal, their co-founder, said the future of retail is at the intersection between digital and physical, right? And between bricks and mortar and e-commerce. And I think particularly when it comes to the vehicle, right? It is a very physical and emotional experience. And
Yeah.
when we talk about models changing, there are some things that will never change, right? That touch and feel of the car, or even the fact that we think physical stores will forever have a role in the industry.
No, absolutely, and I think one of the things we talked about when we were discussing this panel was, the role of innovation and being forward-thinking versus the role of disruption and sort of being forced to change, and there seem to be, those two things operating in tandem when it comes to the automotive industry. So with that, I guess, you touched on it, Andrew, in terms of how you see innovation happening in other industries. I'm curious about how you see disruptions in other industries also influencing auto. So we talked about things like fintech, and whether you see that as something that's facilitating how autos are responding to consumer needs. You want to touch on that a little bit about the disruption that's going on in other spaces and how it's influencing what you're doing?
For sure. I think because the purchase of an automobile or the experience of having a car spans a lot of different touch points. Disruption from other spaces actually drive innovation in automotive. So, for example, take the credit experience. Most cars are either financed or leased, and that credit application experience is pretty frustrating today, right? It's a highly administrative process that no one is truly excited about, and the innovation in being able to deliver credit faster, without as many fields, that process without touching pieces of paper, without wet signatures. I think those are massive opportunities to make that purchase experience better, and then I'm sure David's got lots to talk about in terms of the in-vehicle technologies.
Yeah, I think consumer electronics influenced everything in the interior, where there was really this, I think everyone had a post-iPhone moment, and a lot of times, people, they've come to expect this technology. Well, why, I've got my iPhone, it gets updated every year. Why can't my screen in my car get updated? Or why can't it be just easy to use like my iPhone? There are reasons that things take longer, being automotive grade is certainly no small challenge. But at the same time, the traditional lead times and development times are really, there's pressure to decrease those, to get closer cycles and to get systems that are updatable and things that can move at more of a consumer pace. So we definitely see that. And then, the future is, media consumption in the car, and what's going to be, what sort of digital services are going to come into the car and how they're going to come into the car. Because one of the things that always attracted me to working in this space is it's the most difficult use case there is, because at least until autonomous, when you're on your phone, you're on your phone, but when you're in your car, you're supposed to be driving so you don't kill somebody, right? And then if you're supposed to also be playing with your electronics, making a call or trying to find some music. So it's an incredibly tough challenge that every brand is taking their, going at this in their own way, and there's things that are being learned along the way, and we are evolving, but we have to continue to match the pace of other industries.
But the reality is, in the auto world, from the time that something gets designed to the time that you're upscaling or up-ramping the technology within a plant on the manufacturing side to get something done that's going to address those needs, consumer tastes would have changed somewhere along that life cycle and getting to that product launch. So what's that conversation like, or what's that marketing pitch to the customer to say, this is the amount of innovation that you're going to get now, and this is what's coming in the future? What does that conversation look like in either of your settings?
Well, to me, I don't think the use cases have changed that much in the car. People want to listen to music, they want to make calls, they want to text. How they do it is changing, and that's the expectation. Like voice now is coming in a lot more. I mean, they already had the first gen that was not very successful, but Alexa and Google have raised the bar there as well. But then that brings us to software, and really, over-the-air updates and connected cars is really where the payoff is, and how that gets addressed. Like, I thought it was pretty incredible that Tesla, Consumer Reports dinged them for having their brake stoppage wasn't enough time, so they issued an over-the-air patch, and literally overnight fixed the problem, and Consumer Reports upgraded their rating after that. So I mean, that's unprecedented from a consumer, satisfaction standpoint. Of it's not in the old days, Andrew, it's like you bought the car and you live with it, it never gets better. Now the idea, we talk a lot, within Karma about, your Karma will get better with time because we will update it, and it will get additional features and fixes. And from the manufacturer standpoint, that's great too, because you don't need to have a factory recall and a dealer recall. You can do it over the air, and they walk out the next day and it's done. So I think that's one of the biggest areas of transformation.
Yeah, I think the other thing that comes to mind when you compare across other industries is also a recognition that disruption doesn't happen overnight. It kind of creeps up on you. And when we think about the other sectors where we've seen tremendous change, the headlines that we see today in automotive around changing technologies or disruptive, the dealership model being disrupted, or ownership going away, I think they aren't things that are going to happen overnight. When you look at overall e-commerce, across the space, right? Across all retail, and you look at the percentage of overall retail that it actually is worth. It depends on which report you read. I read a StatsCan report not too long ago. It was single-digit %, right? Dollar value of e-commerce retail versus overall retail, right? And so just that little bit of change, though, has caused significant disruption in the rest of the bricks and mortar retail industry. And so it doesn't happen overnight. Disruption, it's not like you wake up one day and your business has been 100% disrupted. It happens over time. And so always wanting to take one step at a time and being incrementally better, I think, is important.
And so I'll write on too, because I really appreciate what Andrew is doing, because I've been on the outside of the dealer experience, but then once you get on the inside, you realize again what the reality of the situation is. Cars are not like they were, even 10 years ago. And the old days, it was you go to the dealer, you sign the papers, hand you the keys, and off you go. What I found is pretty shocking when I was told you can't depend on any onboarding. You can't depend on the dealer. They're gonna do that. You can't. To me, that's unconscionable, because these things are not. Nothing is intuitive, and especially with the technology that's being packed in these cars, people aren't using it because they're not being onboarded into it properly. They should have their phone paired. They should be given the run through of what they can do and helped to use it, not just expected to, figure it out on the fly. And the worst case is when the guy's driving down the road trying to do this. And I think we've all been there too, and that's not good for the dealer or the brand, but it's sort of this reality that we were forced into. So, I think there's a tremendous opportunity there to reimagine that experience, to really help people integrate all that technology into the rest of their daily lives. That's what it's going to take, and beyond just the nerds that are going to want to do that for themselves and actually read the manual, which is great, God bless them. But for the rest of us, we need help, and to integrate those things.
I wanted to just go back to one item. You talked about the subscription ownership type of model, and one of the things that we talked about when we were discussing the panel was, car ownership versus the commodity of ride sharing, and how the car is actually used in today's market. It may not just be a single owner experience. It may be used for any number of things, whether it's, but not necessarily commercial automaking technology. So how do you address that when you're trying to design or incorporate an experience where it's not just a single driver type of automotive experience that's being looked for, but where you are where you know that there's a market there for a different type of ownership with respect to autos these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is, we think car ownership is not dying, right? I think I read an article not too long ago. I think one of the co-founders of Lyft, right, pronounced car ownership is going to be dead by 2020. I think somewhat self-serving in that regard, right? But we kind of look at it as a spectrum of ownership, if you will. On the one end, you've got Minority Report, that Tom Cruise movie where there is no ownership. We're all hovering around in these pods, right? And all the automakers have probably died by then, right? That is a very, very long way out. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got traditional ownership as it exists today. And then there's varying shades of different models as you start narrowing the band. One of in the last decade, I think one that has tried but hasn't gotten to full scale or full mass adoption is the concept of car share. Right? Cars to Go recently pulled out of Toronto for a variety of reasons, but even if you look at Zipcar, I think it serves a very specific purpose in this very specific niche market, those traditional car share models. But why we think subscription is really interesting and has legs, it's between car share and traditional ownership, where you get the full benefits of ownership. It's your car while you have it. You can leave your stuff in it, set everything up as you want, leave it dirty or clean. It's completely up to you, right? But when you decide that you're based on lifestyles change or just personal preference or changing of the seasons, whatever it is that you want, you're ready for that next vehicle, right? You have the full flexibility of a traditional subscription model. And so that's why we think all the automakers are starting to pile into this and experiment. It's still very early days. That economic model and making it profitable for the automaker and the dealership is still to be seen. But when we think about that spectrum of ownership, there are real benefits of car ownership that I think consumers by and large don't want to surrender, but they are looking for greater flexibility in some regard.
Is that something you're reacting to at Karma much, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, Karma is in a special case because our owners, if they buy a Karma, it's going to be typically one car in their stable, so they're going to be rotating through several. So it's not necessarily anything that's on their mind. However, generally, for me, personalization is a key to the future in all regards, and especially if you think of your persona following you from car to car. So you have your favorites, your preferences that follow you. Your car recognizes you when you come up to it. It could be a shared ownership situation, or it could be a rental, or it could be a fleet, or one of the OEM car swapping programs. So that to me is the key, where it's still my car, even though I'm sharing it with other people. It feels like my car when I get in because it adapts to me.
Okay. I have a couple of questions for the end, but I thought maybe some of these topics that have come up, I thought some of you may have had some peaks of interest as they were speaking, and so I just wanted to see if we had anybody who wanted to join the discussion at this point, and then I might come back to some questions as we have some time. Did anyone have any questions on the concepts we were just discussing up until now, or any of the user experience issues?
Yeah, when it comes to like luxury cars, kind of like
Somebody's going to bring you a mic in 1 second.
when it comes to like the luxury and like high-end side of things, like Rolls-Royce, Bentley, the idea that some people wouldn't want to necessarily own those cars, I'm not really fully there yet. So I'm just interested from your perspective, kind of those high-end luxury brands, how do they enter this and kind of maintain their level of seriousness, culture, and stability, and everything that they're really well known for?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example is Porsche. So Porsche was actually one of the first that launched a subscription model. It's called Porsche Passport, and it's a good example of how innovation can be a offensive move as opposed to just a defensive move. So one of the interesting stats that they've released is 78% of subscribers to Porsche Passport, which is their Porsche subscription model, are new to the brand, right? And so it takes them to an entirely new demographic. There's a lot of things that you got to consider. Particularly, you think about millennials and Gen Y as they rise up and become the primary consumer segment. Are they going to be as adaptive to that traditional ownership model, or do you need to find new ways to serve them, even upper end brands like Porsche? So I think one of the lessons there is innovation can be an offensive move. Where you can be ahead of the pack and actually really benefit from that differentiation. It's not just a defensive move that we have to do to stay alive.
Yeah, I like the example of Porsche because I feel that they are one of the very top brands in terms of being true to their brand while expanding their product platform and embracing digital while still remaining very much a driver-focused brand. So my hat's off to them. In terms of the Bentleys and the Rolls Royces of the world, I think the rich are different than you and me, and they have a very different mindset. Like these are people that could go in and write that check in the morning like they were buying their coffee at Starbucks. So I think that there's the metrics are different there, and honestly I can't pretend to speak to that very well other than to say that that's a very separate conversation to be had.
I thought I saw a question over here.
Thanks for your insights. Really interesting. I'm a car fanatic, so this is very
Nice.
important to me. But on the serious side of it, talking about the consumer and what's going to change, et cetera, and how technology plays into that, how does that impact the supply chain? Because in this province in particular, it's just not the consumer side, it's all the spin-off jobs created by the auto sector. Mm-hmm. So as all this new technology comes forward, and auto tariffs are a big topic now, but as all this new technology comes in, how's it going to affect downstream? The suppliers that we have today where thousands of jobs are there, what needs to happen there? How do they need to innovate to be relevant to the final step when it comes to my house when I buy the car?
Well, I think the supply chains have gotten larger now because really the area is in terms of all of the computer equipment that needs to go in and all the networking within the car. That goes on top of all the traditional heavy metal that goes into the car. So there's tremendous, hardware and software innovation and, opportunities that make their way into that supply chain. And especially with software, there aren't the physical limitations. There's historical limitations to overcoming certain barriers to get in. But once that happens, then, the playing field is wide open. So I just think there's a lot more. And also particularly here where there's a lot of high-tech capability, both in terms of hardware and software development, that's what's going to be leveraged in the future. And then also, I also think that 3D printing for car parts is actually going to be another huge area that's going to explode, especially now that there are a lot of brands that are actually making, not just trim pieces, but actually structural parts out of 3D printed designs. And I think that is a huge area of exploration.
I think, when it comes to the supply chain, automotive is one of those interesting models where the majority of automakers manufacture all these cars first, right? They sit on dealer lots, and then hopefully the dealers can sell them on to end consumers. I think there is an opportunity, particularly as more of these transactions modernize and move towards digital, to if you will, Delify the automotive purchase. Where I think when you go back and you look at how Dell really transformed the way you buy a computer, I think Tesla, in many ways, is doing that as well. Right, for many of those that are starting to take deliveries of Model 3s, those were built to spec, right? And there aren't massive piles of inventory sitting there for that car. And so as you think about the consumer transaction, moving digitally, that's an opportunity for an automaker to really slim down in many ways that supply chain and the amount of capital that they have tied up through that supply chain.
So when you talk about the extent to which software and digital components have become part of the process and the user experience, I think about the amount of data that's being gathered, and whether you're talking about how it's used for insurance purposes or other types of things. It's on its face, it appears as a driving force for innovation in terms of the amount of data that we're gathering on the user experience. How is the industry responding to some of the data and the privacy concerns that are sort of being implemented or sort of being addressed, I guess, through some of the regulations globally right now?
I think in general they're holding their customer data as close to the vest as they possibly can with all their might, which I don't think is the right approach, and I do think will change. There's a tremendous amount of data that can be harvested with the right telematics setup. How it's used is an open question. I think disruption is there, but it's certainly, that's a value-free term there, because I think there's a lot of concerns about how that data could be misused, what's being done with it. Personally, I think the best approach is the consortium approach of sharing data and going to some open model where you can anonymize and share data. But that requires, again, a big culture change for the OEM. So you're going to continue to see these platform wars, but you're also going to see sharing, and then there will be more pressure from the consumer to be safe with their data and be transparent about how it's being used.
I think data also certainly drives the marketing approach. We're working with one automaker right now that has envisioned this concept of Amazon has the one-click purchase, right? We're working with one automaker right now that wants to create the one-click lease renewal, if you will, right? It's not quite as simple as one click. But if imagine you have a vehicle right now, it's coming towards the end of its lease term. How do you get into that next vehicle as efficiently as possible? So the automaker using data to drive recommendations on what based on your driving pattern and what we've done to date. What the right next car, the right payment term, the right kilometer allowance, the right warranty package, all of that recommended to you, so you can almost, if you will, get to that one-click lease renewal experience where it's really kind of a key-to-key delivery. And that's the power of using data to curate and market to customers to ultimately get them into that next car. And so there's a lot of marketing potential in the data that's captured.
Yeah, for sure. Before we take a couple of more questions, I just wanted to ask one last question of each of you, and then we'll have a little bit more audience discussion, because we started off talking about fostering a culture of innovation, and so much of that has to come from the people within the organization, of course. And we talked about this in our discussion. This could be a panel for a whole other day or conference. But in terms of the quest for talent, and how you bring people into your organization who are really going to drive that passion for the user experience and the customer experience that we've been talking about. What are your sort of top efforts being focused on with respect to getting the right people to foster that innovation?
Well, I think that the competition for talent is tremendous out there, and within automotive, there's kind of sort of two paths to take, but the traditional one is you worked in automotive, so now you get another automotive job, right? Those people are of tremendous value because they know how that world works, and as Tesla has found out, you can't just ignore the lessons that have been hard learned over all the years there. From my standpoint, I look for people that have grown their core competency, they're subject matter experts in one core thing, but their curiosity extends out beyond that. And what I'm struck about today at the conference with hearing Sheetal and the other keynote speakers today is the wide-ranging, curiosity and wide-ranging, ability to put things together and see how the dots can connect into a meaningful product or an experience. And so that's what I look for more than real. You need to have a base competency, but then you need to grow beyond that and far beyond your. The best innovators to me are the ones with the widest reaches and widest interests, and the ones that are able to pull it together.
How about you, Andrew?
For us, we see a lot of value, and a lot of our innovation comes from having different perspectives. So I talked about how when we started the company, we didn't have anybody with a real auto background in the company. We've since added that. But if you look at the makeup of our team, there are folks that have been in the auto space for a really, really long time. There's folks that have purely been on the consumer side. We have a person that is joining us that helped build up the Tesla retail model, right? And so having different perspectives from the inside of the industry, outside of the industry, I think really helps us see things differently.
Right.
And then beyond that, I think it's constantly just being willing to challenge the status quo, being able to constantly ask why. And I like what David said earlier around, ultimately having a strong point of view. After looking at it from all perspectives, ultimately you kind of have to just pick a side and go with it, because trying to be a one-size-fits-all doesn't fit anyone really.
I think we have time for one last question. This gentleman in the back had his hand up for a minute.
Hello. I have a question for Andrew, but it touches on to Karma, so maybe David, you could chime in here. I work in the exotic automotive industry, trading Lamborghinis, Ferraris, so whoever had a question about luxury sports cars can come reach out and have some insights. But my question relates to Karma. Karma, an electric sports car, didn't follow the Tesla path of going straight to direct-to-consumer. They actually went to the dealership channel, like Grand Touring here and Holland Group in Montreal. And Andrew, you're more familiar with the dealer and taking that experience, turning it into e-commerce. For David, I guess the question is, why do they do that? And for Andrew is, what do you gain and what kind of insights do you have from that?
So, from what I understand from our rationale there, it's really that our owner is likely to own one of those other brands. So to be there at somewhere like Grand Touring here on the floor with those other brands, and we provide an alternative brand for the right owner. So I think that they see there's a chance you aggregate the most likely consumer in one spot, and then you go where the money is, basically.
I think when you look at the majority of how cars are sold, a dealer is a critical part of that journey. Both the storefront is important because customers still want to touch and feel the cars, but we think that there is evolution there, right? When you look at the Genesis model as an example, there are a couple of folks from Genesis in the room here. We think that's a unique evolution where it's still dealers that are ultimately facilitating that sales process that are local representatives to customers, but at the same time they've evolved the model where it's the automaker's inventory, and they're able to deliver a consistent sales experience with a consistent price across the board. So there's a spectrum. We don't think dealerships are going away. They're well entrenched in the industry. It's really about how to balance that ecosystem.
Okay. Great way to end. I think we're all not going away. We're all going to have a lot more user experiences to talk about and a lot more sales targets to pursue. So thank you so much for bringing those insights to the panel this afternoon. We have run out of time, but I'm sure Andrew and Dave will be here for a little bit longer if you have some specific questions that you have for them. Thank you both for being a part of this today, and we look forward to hearing more from the developing market in the next little while.
Thank you.